My name's Audry Deal-McEver, and I'm a full-time studio artist based out of Nashville, Tennessee. I'm coming to you all today out of my home studio here in Sylvan Park, which is a neighborhood just west of downtown Nashville. And I'm going to be leading you all in a workshop to show you how I make teapots on the potter's wheel. The clay I'm using today is made by Laguna. It's called B-Mix, and it's a cone 6 clay body. In upcoming segments, I'm going to show you how I make the lid and attach handles too. Thanks for watching. So I have some freshly wedged clay. I wedged this using the rosebud method, so you can kind of see that shape left over. This clay body I'm using is Laguna B-Mix, which is half porcelain, half white stoneware. I think a lot of you all have used this clay before. And before I get started, I'm going to begin by beating this into a cone shape. Trying to get this nice and even. And then I'm also going to roll the bottom of this against the bat to make sure my bottom doesn't have any kind of indent that would cause an air bubble to get sealed against the bat. So, splatting this down. I know a lot of you start by making your clay into a ball shape, but the reason I'm using a cone is because this is a bigger piece of clay and I'm going to be using the coning method to center. And it's just a little easier to start with the clay already in the shape you need. I measured this, or I weighed it before I put this down the wheel, and this is about 4 pounds. I also want to mention that you can make a teapot out of less clay than that. I always encourage students to think about how much clay you can comfortably center and use that as a starting place. If you can only comfortably center 3 pounds, make a 3-pound teapot to start with. But the reason I use 4 pounds is because this allows me to make a teapot that's big enough to hold multiple cups of tea. Because I think that's my favorite functionality component of a teapot, is that I can brew multiple cups of tea at a time. However, I know lots of people make single cup teapots that are really nice too, so kind of up to you, but that's why I'm using this much clay. And this clay also shrinks 12%, so I'm also making this a little bigger than I need it to be so that later, after it's out of the kiln, it will still be big enough to hold multiple cups. So to center this clay, I'm getting kind of a medium fast speed on the potter's wheel. And to cone this, I'm pushing forward with the back kind of heel of my left hand. Meanwhile, my fingers on my right hand are across from that pressure, pulling back towards me from the other direction. And on my first pass sliding up, I'm being sure to point the clay right away. That's important if you're trying to avoid that volcano that has the indent in the top. And that's bad, of course, because it's an easy way to trap clay. I'm sorry, not trap clay, trap water and air in the clay. So to push this down, I'm making a fist on the top with my right hand. My fist is around my left thumb, and I'm pushing down with the side of my right hand while pushing forward with my left. If I do this just right, by the time I get to the bottom, I should be more or less centered. Need a little bit more water there. Yeah, that feels good. So I'm just running a finger down the side. I'm going to get rid of that little bit of a skirt that's coming out from the clay. Just giving it one more little tweak. I think that's centered. Of course, the way you can check yourself is by gliding your fingers across and making sure the clay is not bouncing or wiggling. That feels good. The shape I've centered into is really important. This is different than the shape I'd center into if I was making a bowl. Of course, that would be lower and wider. But since I want this teapot to be a little bit more tall, and not necessarily real narrow, but it's going to be stretched more upright than a lot of the plates and bowls and low wide forms. So it's important I start in a shape that will let me pull the clay in the right direction without getting too wide. So that's why I have this shape here. Going to start opening this up by creating an indent with my thumbs on the top. And I've been real careful here to make sure that my thumbs are really in the center when I push down. And this little indentation is going to serve as a pre-drill so that my pointer fingers can then work straight down and start to open this form up. And when I think I'm most of the way to the bottom, I'm going to get my needle tool and of course check by piercing the clay at the bottom all the way down to the bat and lifting this up to check. That looks like about 1/2 inch, which is good. I want just a smidge more clay than I normally would need because I am going to trim a foot ring on my teapots. Since teapots are kind of big fancy forms, I just think they look nice and finished with the foot ring. Now I'm pulling the clay back towards my body. Normally I just do this with my pointer fingers, but because this is a lot of clay, I have a couple fingers in there so that I can be strong and steady. When I do this process, I'm being really gradual when I ease into my pressure, and I'm very gently releasing. I realize sometimes it looks like I'm letting go of the clay a lot faster than I am, but from doing this for 14 years, I've learned how to gently, gradually release in what appears to be a pretty quick way. I'm still being careful. Okay, so this is now open about 3 inches wide, and I think that's all I need. I don't want this to be real wide. At this point, I'm going to go in and compress the base. And to do this, I'm just pushing down. I'm not trying to make this deeper, but I'm pushing down with the even pressure, and I'm sliding from one side across the bottom to the other. And I'm actually putting a sponge under my fingers to do this, just to kind of spread out my pressure a little bit. This is so important to compress the clay so you don't get cracks later. This clay that's half porcelain loves to crack. Now I'm ready to pull my walls, and to do this, I have my thumbs linked. I have my left hand inside, my right hand outside. And you all have probably figured this out, but I am right-handed, which is the reason I'm doing everything on the right side of the wheel, and I have the wheel spinning counterclockwise. So I'm going to start pulling. I have all my fingers up against the clay, but really only my longest fingers are making contact with pressure. The rest are just gliding there. I'm really slowly working my way up the sides, and I'm gently releasing before I get to the top, and I'm compressing the top. To do that, I am holding the sides up with my pointer and thumb from my left hand. I'm putting a pointer finger from my right hand across the top. Need a little bit more water. I'm going to do another pull. As I pull, I'm being really careful to make sure the clay is responding to my pull in the way I want. What would be bad here is if this started getting real wide, because I really need this form to stay narrow at the top since I have to create a lid on there. I don't want a huge opening for that lid. I'm also, of course, making sure that this is staying more or less straight. This is not the time to start establishing a huge belly yet. I usually pull for height, and then on my third or fourth pull, I start going in and adding my shape. On this third pull, I'm also going to back off a little sooner, so right about here, I'm gently releasing my pressure, and that's because I need the lip of this pot to stay a lot thicker than usual as well. I'm actually going to end up splitting this later on to create the gallery for my lid. I've pulled this higher than what I can actually reach with my thumbs linked. So you notice on these last couple pulls, I have my fingers working independently, but I have my elbow on my right hand up against my body in a way to where it can really anchor that arm. And as soon as I get close enough to the top to where my thumbs can link again, I'm doing so. So this is the point where I'm making sure I don't have any unnecessary thickness, which I don't. And I'm also starting to establish my shape. So I'm going to start by collaring that top in a little bit more. I want to really keep that tight and narrow. And then I'm going to start doing my last pass on this teapot by just gliding my fingers across the profile. And I'm looking at this from the side, because I can't see much from the top right now. And I'm just tracing this, trying to start getting my proportions right. I really like teapots that go in a little bit at the bottom and then have this big swell to shoulder at the top, and then have that more narrow lip at the top for my gallery. The gallery is going to be the little shelf that holds up the lid. So this is looking pretty good. I'm ready to start refining my shape. And to do this, I'm going to go ahead and get the water out of the inside. This is important because this clay will start getting floppy if I keep it this wet for too long. So I'm going to go ahead and dry it out. And I'm also going to get in here with a rib and to start refining my shapes. So I use this little metal rib. This is one of my favorites. It's made by Mud Tools. It's like a little baby kidney shape. I like that because I can kind of tuck it down in the bottom and get that nice curve I like. And then I'm going to start coming up the side. You notice as I go, I'm wiping a lot of that slip off. I also love this tool because I can use the back curve of it back here around the top to make sure that that is a nice gradual transition. Although I am going to redefine that transition in a minute. That's looking pretty good. Again, I'm looking at this from the side. I think right now I'm going to go ahead and trim a little bit of my extra clay off the bottom with my wooden knife. I already mentioned I am going to trim a foot ring on this later, so this area will change just a little bit, but this is a good time for me at least to get enough of that extra clay off to where I can make sure that this profile is looking the way I want it to. Might come in with a flexible rib at this point. And this is a little bit of a hard shape to have that narrow of a base, this big of a swell. Being real careful to make sure that I don't have an abrupt change in shape anywhere. Trying to make sure that this is all gradual enough to be structurally sound. So in other words, if you think about the power of arches in architecture, the reason you can have an arched doorway that holds up a wall above it is because the arch spreads out that weight and pressure, but it only works if you have an arch that is real even and gradual in its curve. It wouldn't work as well if I had a corner or a real sharp change in shape through here. So that's looking pretty good. I think I'm ready to make my gallery. One other thing I'm going to do before that is go ahead and create this little division line between the top and the side. This is not something you have to do. It's just something I like to do because of the way I use surface design on my pots. It's nice to have a place for the pattern to end. So I kind of think about the top of my pots as having almost like a little shirt collar on them. So this part's going to stay white up above. And I dropped my sponge. There we go. Okay, so last of all, I'm going to go in and create my teapot gallery. Just checking this shape one more time. Make sure I like that curve. Spend a lot of time looking at that profile. That looks good. So the reason this gallery is the very last thing I do is because this top's going to end up being pretty fragile by the time I split it. So I'm going to come in with my wooden knife and I'm going to brace between my fingers to find the center point in that top lip, and I'm going to start working my my wooden knife down. So I've probably only gone down about 1/4 of an inch. That is going to be plenty. And now I'm using the back part of my wooden knife to lean the inside part down. And that is creating my little shelf for the gallery. So when I'm doing this, there are a couple functionality things to consider. First of all, I need this gallery to be deep enough to help hold that lid in place, because if you think about the way a teapot works, you are picking it up and you're tilting it to pour. So I want this to be deep enough to help hold that lid in place even when somebody tilts the teapot. But at the same time, I also would like to be able to get my hand down in here to clean it. So I am going to take my needle tool. I'm going to cut just a little bit of that inner gallery off, just because it was a little wider than it needed to be. And that should be good. It really just needs to be wide enough to really support the lid well. So that's looking good. I got a drip of water or two inside. Let me go after real quick. But then I'm just spending some time with my sponge, compressing that area, smoothing it. Again, with the functionality concern, I don't want to have sharp edges on any parts of this to where the lid could chip it. So I'm taking my sponge and really rounding all those areas. It also is best if this shelf on the gallery leans down just a little bit. I wouldn't want it to lean up because it would create a awkward fit for my lid. Might not sit quite evenly. And last of all, before I take this off, I'm going to use the back of my metal little baby rib here. Just strain up the outside of this gallery so that looks really cared for and intentional. That looks pretty good. Giving it one more look over. I want to stand the top of this up just a little bit more. Got a finger underneath. Just giving that the tiniest bit of a lift. There we go. I don't even know if you all could see that. Just making sure that that curve is exactly how I want it to be. Nice. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and call this guy done. I'm going to cut it off the wheel. And I do spin as I cut. And I do this just because I can get a little bit more of an even cut. But the trick to that is, of course, I have to pull that wire really tight, and I work it through really slowly. So there's my teapot body, and now I'm going to set it aside and come back in a minute and show you how I make my lid.